The dust clung to Felicity O'Brien's parched lips as she stumbled toward the silhouette of a small trading post, her once fine leather shoes splitting at the seams, the last remnants of her former life in Boston. It had been 3 days since the stagecoach robbery that left her stranded in this unforgiving territory, her traveling companions dead, and her possessions stolen, all except the clothes on her back and these deteriorating shoes. The year was 1873, and the Arizona Territory had little mercy for a woman alone. Felicity's auburn hair had come loose from its pins, falling in tangled waves down her back as she approached the weathered building. A sign swung in the hot breeze, Mackenzie Trading Post. Her stomach twisted with hunger, her throat parched from thirst. Several horses were hitched outside, and the sound of men's voices carried through the open door. Felicity hesitated, straightening her soiled dress as best she could before stepping onto the porch. The conversation inside died as she entered, 4 pairs of eyes turning to assess the disheveled woman in their midst. "Water, please," she managed, her voice cracking. I can pay." Her hand moved to her foot, ready to remove the shoes, the only items of value she had left. The proprietor, a stout man with a gray streaked beard, looked her up and down with undisguised suspicion. "What brings a lady like you out here alone?" Before she could answer, one of the men at the bar turned fully to face her. Tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially shadowed by a worn Stetson, he assessed her with piercing blue eyes. "I was on the Tucson stage," Felicity explained, struggling to maintain her dignity. "We were attacked 3 days ago. I'm the only one who survived." A murmur went through the small gathering. The Tucson stage robbery had been news, but no one had mentioned a survivor. "I need shelter for the night," she continued, bending to untie her shoe. "These are fine leather made in Boston. They should be worth something to you." The tall man stepped forward, stopping her with a raised hand. "Madam, keep your shoes." His voice was deep with a slight drawl. "You'll need them where we're going." She looked up, confusion evident on her sunburned face. "Name's Jackson Mills," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "And if you're heading west, you might as well walk beside me instead," the proprietor scoffed. "You taking in strays now, Mills?" Jackson ignored him, his eyes never leaving Felicity's face. "I've got a wagon outside, heading to Willow Creek." "You're welcome to join, provided you can cook better than I can." A slight smile played at the corner of his mouth. Felicity straightened, trying to assess the man before her. He wasn't like the others, there was something steadier about him, something in those eyes that spoke of reliability. With few options and fewer resources, she made her decision. "Felicity O'Brien," she replied, offering her name like a contract. "And yes, Mr. Mills, I can cook." He nodded once, then turned to the proprietor. "Sam, give the lady water and wrap up some provisions. Put it on my account." The stout man grumbled but complied, pulling a tin cup from behind the counter and filling it from a barrel. Felicity drank gratefully, the cool water reviving her parched throat. "We leave in 15 minutes, Jackson said, returning to his previous conversation with another man, though his eyes occasionally drifted back to Felicity as she savored the water. True to his word, Jackson Mills had his wagon ready to depart shortly after. It wasn't fancy, a sturdy prairie schooner loaded with supplies and pulled by 2 solid draft horses. He helped her climb onto the wooden seat, her legs nearly giving out from exhaustion as she settled beside him. "Thank you," she said softly as he handed her a canteen. "Don't thank me yet," he replied, flicking the reins to set the horses in motion. "It's 3 days to Willow Creek, and these parts aren't kind to travelers." As they pulled away from the trading post, Felicity felt both relief and apprehension. She was alive, no longer alone in the wilderness, but she was now dependent on a stranger whose motives remained unclear. "What brings you to Arizona Territory, Miss O'Brien?" Jackson asked as they traveled, the landscape stretching endlessly before them. Felicity hesitated, wondering how much to reveal. "I was to be a schoolteacher in Tucson," she finally said. "The town council arranged for my passage from Boston." Jackson nodded, keeping his eyes on the trail. "Long way from home." "There's nothing left for me there," she replied, the words heavy with unspoken grief. My parents died last winter, influenza. I'm sorry to hear that. The simple words, spoken without pity but with genuine sympathy, made her throat tighten unexpectedly. And you, Mr. Mills. What's your business in these parts? A slight smile touched his lips. Call me Jackson. Mr. Mills was my father. He adjusted his hat against the lowering sun. I've got land outside Willow Creek, building a ranch there, just returned from selling some cattle in Santa Fe. The wagon hit a rut, jostling them both. Jackson's arm shot out instinctively, steadying Felicity before she could topple off the seat. The brief contact his calloused hand on her arm reminded her of how long it had been since she'd experienced a gentle human touch. Thank you, she murmured again, embarrassed by the sudden warmth in her cheeks. As the day waned, Jackson guided the wagon off the main trail toward a small copse of cottonwood trees near a creek. We'll make camp here, he announced, bringing the horses to a halt. Water and shade. Can't ask for better. Felicity discovered that, despite her exhaustion, there was comfort in having tasks to complete. Jackson set up a small campfire while she prepared a simple meal from the provisions: beans, dried beef, and coffee. They ate in companionable silence as darkness settled around them. You should get some rest, Jackson said when they'd finished. Take the bedroll in the wagon. I'll sleep out here by the fire. I couldn't possibly. You can and you will, he interrupted firmly. You look about ready to collapse, Miss O'Brien. Too tired to argue, Felicity climbed into the wagon bed where Jackson had arranged a makeshift sleeping area. The bedroll was rough but clean, smelling of sunshine and open air. Despite her unfamiliar surroundings and the company of a man she'd just met, Felicity fell into a deep, dreamless sleep almost immediately. She woke to the aroma of coffee and the soft sounds of morning birds calling, the horses nickering softly, the crackle of the rekindled fire. For a moment disoriented, she didn't know where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. Sitting up, she saw Jackson crouched by the fire, pouring coffee into a tin cup. He looked up, noticing her movement. Morning, he called. Coffee's hot if you want some. Felicity climbed down from the wagon, conscious of her rumpled appearance. She'd never spent a day in the same clothes, let alone multiple days, and the Boston lady in her cringed at her dishevelment. Is there? She hesitated. Is there somewhere I might freshen up a bit? Jackson nodded toward the creek. Water's clean, I'll keep my back turned. He handed her a small bar of soap and a worn but clean cloth. Take your time, we're not in a hurry. Grateful for his understanding, Felicity made her way to the creek. The water was cool and refreshing against her skin as she washed her face and hands, doing her best to tidy her hair with just her fingers for a comb. The simple act of cleansing restored some of her dignity, and when she returned to the campfire, she felt more human. Jackson handed her a cup of coffee and a plate with some journey bread. Not exactly a Boston breakfast, he said with a slight smile. It's perfect, she replied, realizing she meant it. The simple food tasted better than any elaborate meal she could remember. As they broke camp and continued their journey, Felicity found herself studying her benefactor more closely. Jackson Mills was not what she would have called handsome in Boston society. His face was too weathered, his manner too direct. But there was an undeniable appeal to his self-assurance, to the quiet competence with which he handled every task. His hands, strong and calloused, guided the horses with gentle firmness. How did you come to be in Arizona? She asked as the wagon rolled steadily westward. Jackson was silent for so long that Felicity thought he might not answer. Then he spoke, his voice measured. War changed everything for a lot of us. After Appomattox, I couldn't go back to Virginia. Too many ghosts. His jaw tightened slightly. Headed west instead. Worked as a drover, then a scout. Saved enough to buy my own land 2 years ago. You fought for the Confederacy? She asked carefully, thinking of her brothers who had worn Union blue. He glanced at her, reading the concern in her face. I fought for Virginia, Miss O'Brien. And I've had my fill of fighting since then. The simple statement told her more about the man than a longer explanation might have. Whatever his past loyalties, Jackson Mills was a man looking forward, not back. As the day progressed, the terrain became more rugged. Jackson pointed out landmarks, teaching her to read the land as they traveled. He showed her how to identify water sources from the vegetation, how to spot game trails, how to recognize the signs of other travelers. "Knowledge keeps you alive out here," he explained. "The land doesn't care if you're a lady from Boston or a cowhand from Texas. It treats everyone the same." By midday, clouds had gathered on the horizon, dark and threatening. Jackson eyed them with concern. "We need to find better shelter than the wagon before that hits," he said, urging the horses to a faster pace. "There's an old line shack about an hour ahead if we push." The wind picked up as they traveled, bringing with it the scent of rain. Felicity's heart quickened as she saw the storm clouds advancing, remembering stories of flash floods that could sweep away wagons and livestock in minutes. Jackson's prediction proved accurate. Just as the first heavy drops began to fall, a small wooden structure came into view, nestled against a rocky outcropping. It wasn't much, just a one-room cabin with a sagging roof, but it was shelter. They reached the shack just as the storm broke in earnest. Jackson helped Felicity down from the wagon, then quickly unhitched the horses and led them to a lean-to at the side of the cabin. By the time he joined her inside, they were both soaked despite their haste. The interior was sparse but dry: a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with two mismatched chairs, and a narrow cot against one wall. Dust covered everything, but it was clear the place was occasionally maintained for travelers. "Line companies keep these shacks stocked for their riders," Jackson explained, shaking water from his hat. "Anyone's welcome to use them as long as they leave them better than they found them." He set about building a fire while Felicity explored their temporary shelter. A shelf held basic provisions: coffee, beans, flour, and a trunk contained blankets and a few cooking implements. "We're in luck," she said, holding up a dented kettle. "We can have hot coffee." Jackson looked up from the fireplace where flames were beginning to catch. In the growing light, with her hair dampened to a deeper auburn and her eyes bright with relief, Felicity struck him with unexpected force. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a recognition before he quickly turned back to his task. "Coffee would be mighty welcome," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. Outside, the storm raged, rain hammering against the roof and wind howling around the corners of the cabin. Inside, a different kind of awareness grew as they moved around the small space, acutely conscious of each other's presence. Felicity busied herself preparing a simple meal from their provisions and what she found in the cabin, grateful for the distraction. Jackson ventured out briefly to check on the horses, returning even more sodden than before. "Here," she said impulsively, handing him a blanket. "You should change out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." He took the blanket, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Thank you, Miss O'Brien." "Felicity," she corrected him. "If I'm to call you Jackson, then you should use my given name as well." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Felicity," he repeated, as if testing the feel of it. "It suits you." She turned away, suddenly flustered, as he stepped behind the shelter of a blanket she'd hung across a corner to change his wet shirt. They ate their meal at the small table, the storm creating an intimate cocoon around them. Jackson told her more about Willow Creek and his ranch, painting a picture of the life he was building there. Felicity found herself increasingly drawn to his vision: a home carved from wilderness, independence earned through hard work and perseverance. "And what will you do now?" he asked, studying her across the flickering light of the lantern he'd lit. With Tucson no longer an option, the question brought her sharply back to reality. What would she do? Her meager savings had been in her trunk on the stagecoach. She had no family to return to, no position waiting for her. "I don't know," she admitted, the weight of her uncertainty evident in her voice. "I still want to teach. Perhaps there's a need in Willow Creek or another settlement nearby." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "Willow Creek's growing, families moving in." "They've been talking about building a proper school." He hesitated. "Until then, you'd be welcome to stay at my place. I've got a cabin that's separate from the main house, was meant for hired help, but it's empty now." The offer stunned her, both its generosity and the impropriety it suggested. A single woman staying on the property of a bachelor she barely knew. It was unthinkable by Boston standards, but they weren't in Boston, and survival in this territory sometimes required different rules. "That's very kind," she said carefully, "but I wouldn't want to impose or cause talk." "Folks out here judge less on appearances and more on character," he replied. "But I understand your concern. There's a widow in town, Mrs. Peterson, who takes in boarders. That might suit you better until you find your feet." The consideration behind his words, offering an alternative that would preserve her reputation, touched Felicity deeply. This was a man who thought beyond his own convenience. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'd be grateful for an introduction to Mrs. Peterson." Outside, the storm began to abate, the drumming of rain easing to a gentle patter. Inside, however, something else was building, a connection neither had anticipated when they'd set out that morning. As night fell completely, the question of sleeping arrangements became unavoidable. The cabin offered only the single narrow cot. "You take the bed," Jackson said firmly. "I'll make do by the fire." Felicity wanted to protest, but knew it would be futile. This man had a stubborn streak that matched her own. Instead, she helped him arrange blankets near the hearth, their hands occasionally brushing as they worked together. Later, lying on the cot while Jackson settled by the fire, Felicity found herself wide awake despite her exhaustion. The rhythm of his breathing, the occasional crackle of the flames, the unfamiliar yet somehow comforting presence of another person after days of frightening solitude, it all conspired to keep sleep at bay. "Jackson?" she whispered, unsure if he was still awake. "Yes." His reply came immediately, suggesting he too had been lying awake. "Thank you, not just for today, but for stopping when you could have ridden past." There was a pause before he answered. "We all need someone to stop for us sometimes." The simple wisdom of his words followed her into sleep, a new sense of safety enveloping her despite the wilderness that surrounded them. Morning brought clear skies and the chirping of birds. Felicity woke to find Jackson already outside, tending to the horses. She quickly washed and tidied herself, using the precious moments alone to gather her composure. Something was changing between them, something unexpected and potentially dangerous to her already vulnerable heart. When she stepped outside, the world seemed renewed by the storm. The desert plants looked greener, the air smelled fresh, and Jackson Mills stood in the morning light looking more handsome than any man had a right to be. "Ready to move on?" he asked, offering her a cup of coffee he'd prepared over a small fire outside. "Yes," she replied, accepting both the coffee and the journey ahead. They traveled all day, making good time on roads washed clean by the rain. Jackson pointed out tracks in the mud, deer, coyote, the occasional mountain lion, teaching her to read the stories written in the earth. "The land talks to you if you learn to listen," he said. Same as people do, Felicity found herself wondering what stories she was revealing to him without realizing it. Could he read her growing attraction as easily as he read those tracks? By late afternoon, they crested a rise and Jackson pulled the wagon to a halt. "There," he said, pointing to a valley below where a river wound through grassland. "That's Willow Creek." From their vantage point, Felicity could see a small settlement nestled along the river, perhaps 24 buildings clustered around what appeared to be a main street. Beyond the town, scattered homesteads dotted the landscape, and to the east, she could make out a larger property with corrals and several buildings. "My place," Jackson said, following her gaze to the distant ranch. "It's not much yet, but it will be." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and Felicity found herself imagining what it might become under his care. The thought surprised her. She had never considered herself suited to ranch life. They made camp one last time, close enough to see the town but too far to reach it before nightfall. As they sat by the fire after their evening meal, Felicity found herself reluctant to reach their destination. These days on the trail with Jackson had created a bond she hadn't expected. "Tell me about your dream," she said impulsively. "For your ranch, what do you see it becoming?" Something in Jackson's face softened as he looked into the fire. "A home," he said simply. "A place where children can grow up safe, where the work is hard but rewarding." He paused, then added more quietly, a place where the ghosts can finally rest. The vulnerability in his voice made Felicity's heart ache. This man carried burdens she could only guess at. And you? He asked, turning those intense blue eyes on her. What's your dream, Felicity O'Brien? No one had asked her that question before. In Boston, her path had been predetermined: marry well, maintain a respectable household, perhaps engage in suitable charitable works. Teaching had been her small rebellion, a way to use her mind for something more. To matter, she finally said, to build something lasting. I thought teaching would allow me to shape young minds, to leave something behind when I'm gone. She smiled ruefully. It sounds fanciful when said aloud. Not fanciful, Jackson disagreed. Necessary. Communities need builders of all kinds. Some raise barns, others raise children's minds. His understanding, free of judgment or condescension, felt like a gift. In that moment, sitting beneath the vast Arizona sky with a man who saw her clearly, Felicity realized how much she'd changed in just a few days. The Boston lady was fading, replaced by a woman who could envision a different kind of life. The next morning brought them into Willow Creek proper. The town was bustling despite its small-size wagons moving along the main street, a blacksmith hammering at his forge, women going about their shopping, children playing outside the building that served as both church and school. People called out greetings to Jackson as they passed, curious eyes taking in the woman beside him. Felicity sat straighter, conscious of making a good first impression despite her travel-worn appearance. Jackson guided the wagon to a neat white house at the edge of town. A plump, gray-haired woman was hanging laundry in the yard. Mrs. Peterson, Jackson called as he brought the wagon to a halt. Got someone you might want to meet. The woman turned, shading her eyes against the sun. Jackson Mills, is that you bringing a lady to my door? Wonders never cease. Her tone was teasing but kind as she approached. Jackson jumped down from the wagon, then helped Felicity descend. Martha Peterson, this is Miss Felicity O'Brien from Boston. She was meant for Tucson, but ran into trouble on the way. I was hoping you might have a room to spare. Mrs. Peterson's sharp eyes took in Felicity's appearance, noting the quality of her dress despite its soiled condition and the bearing that spoke of good breeding. Any friend of Jackson's is welcome here, she said warmly, extending her hand. Come in, dear. You look like you could use a proper bath and a soft bed. Felicity felt an unexpected surge of emotion at the simple kindness. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I'd be most grateful. Jackson, you come back for supper, the older woman instructed. 6 o'clock sharp. We'll get Miss O'Brien settled and hear her story properly. Jackson tipped his hat. Yes, madam. His eyes met Felicity's briefly. I'll be back this evening. As he drove away toward his ranch, Felicity felt a strange mixture of relief and loss. The intensity of their days together gave way to a new uncertainty. What place would she find in this community, and what would become of the connection that had formed between them? Mrs. Peterson proved to be a godsend. She provided not only a clean, comfortable room, but also fresh clothing borrowed from her daughter who had moved to California the previous year. About your size, I'd say, she commented as Felicity emerged from a glorious bath, wrapped in a borrowed robe. The blue calico should suit you fine for now. The dress was simpler than anything Felicity had worn in Boston, but it was clean and well made. Once dressed, with her hair properly arranged for the first time in days, she felt renewed. Mrs. Peterson sat her down in the kitchen with a cup of tea and gentle questions about her journey. Felicity told her the basics: the stagecoach robbery, her days alone in the wilderness, Jackson's timely appearance. Providence, the older woman declared firmly. The Lord put you in Jackson's path for a reason. He's been very kind, Felicity said carefully. Mrs. Peterson's eyes twinkled. Kind isn't a word most folks would use for Jackson Mills. Honorable, yes. Hardworking, certainly, but he keeps to himself mostly, except for business. She studied Felicity over her teacup. Must be something special about you to make him play escort all the way from Madison's trading post. Felicity felt her cheeks warm. I'm sure he would have done the same for anyone in distress. Perhaps, Mrs. Peterson conceded, though her expression suggested she believed otherwise. Now, tell me about your plans. Jackson mentioned you're a teacher, grateful for the change of subject. Felicity explained her training and experience. Mrs. Peterson listened intently, occasionally nodding. Well now, that is fortunate, she said when Felicity had finished. Our last teacher, Miss Wilson, just got married to a rancher from up north. The school board's been in a state trying to find a replacement before the fall term. Hope flared in Felicity's heart. Do you think they might consider me? Consider you? They'll be fighting over who gets to offer you the position first. Mrs. Peterson laughed. Judge Parker heads the school board. I'll send word to him this afternoon that you're here. True to her word, by the time Jackson arrived for supper, Mrs. Peterson had arranged for Felicity to meet with Judge Parker the following morning. The possibilities that had seemed so distant just hours before were suddenly within reach. Jackson did a double take when he saw her, clean and properly dressed, setting the table in Mrs. Peterson's dining room. Something flickered in his eyes, appreciation, certainly, but also a wistfulness that caught at Felicity's heart. You look. He began, then seemed to think better of whatever he'd planned to say. You look rested, Miss O'Brien. Felicity, she reminded him gently. And yes, Mrs. Peterson has been most generous. Least I could do, the older woman said, bringing a steaming pot roast to the table. Now sit, both of you, before this gets cold. The meal was the finest Felicity had eaten in weeks: tender meat, fresh vegetables from Mrs. Peterson's garden, homemade bread still warm from the oven. The conversation flowed easily, with Mrs. Peterson sharing town gossip and Jackson offering occasional comments about his ranch or local matters. Judge Parker will see Felicity tomorrow about the teaching position, Mrs. Peterson announced as she served apple pie for dessert. Jackson looked up sharply. Already, that's good news. Was there a note of reservation in his voice? Felicity couldn't be sure. If I'm hired, I'll need to find more permanent lodgings, she said. Perhaps there's a cottage to rent in town. You're welcome to stay here as long as needed, Mrs. Peterson assured her. But there's the old Simmons place on Cottonwood Lane. Been empty since they moved to Denver last spring. Nothing fancy, but it's sound. Felicity nodded, trying to imagine herself in a house of her own in this frontier town. After the tumult of recent days, the prospect of stability was appealing yet also, somehow, a little daunting. When the meal ended, Jackson rose to leave. I should get back to the ranch. Got an early start tomorrow with the new calves. I'll walk you out, Felicity said impulsively, ignoring Mrs. Peterson's knowing smile. The evening air was cool as they stepped onto the porch, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. For a moment, neither spoke, the familiar companionship of their journey lingering between them. Thank you again, Felicity finally said, for everything. Jackson turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. I'm glad you're settling in well. You'll make a fine teacher for Willow Creek. I hope so. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. Will I see you again, outside of chance meetings in town, I mean? Something shifted in his face, a softening, a vulnerability quickly masked. I'm not much for social calls, Felicity. Ranch keeps me busy. The formality in his tone hurt more than she expected. After their days together, the connection she'd felt, this sudden distance felt like rejection. Of course, she said, striving to match his tone. I understand. He studied her face for a long moment, then sighed, his shoulders dropping slightly. Truth is, a lady like you deserves better prospects than a ranch hand with too many memories. He gestured vaguely toward the town. Willow Creek's growing, the new bank manager's a widower. Dr. Thompson's son is back from medical school back east. Good men. Educated men. Understanding dawned, warming Felicity from within despite the evening chill. This wasn't rejection, it was Jackson's misguided attempt to do what he thought best for her. Mr. Mills, she said, deliberately formal, are you suggesting I should set my cap for men I've never met when I've already found the company of one particular man quite satisfactory? His eyes widened slightly, uncertainty replacing the careful distance he'd tried to establish. Felicity, I'm not what? Not good enough, not educated enough. She took a step closer, emboldened by the realization that his withdrawal came from insecurity, not indifference. I may have been raised in Boston society, Jackson, but I've learned more about courage and character in the past week than in all my years there. He stood very still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. What are you saying? I'm saying that I would very much like to continue our acquaintance. Properly, of course, she added with a small smile. Perhaps you might call on Sunday after church if your ranch duties permit. The transformation of his expression from guarded to hopeful was something Felicity knew she would remember for the rest of her life. I believe they might, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. Yes, I believe they might at that. 3 months later, Felicity stood at the window of her small classroom, watching the first snowflakes of winter drift lazily from a pewter sky. The school term had been a success beyond her expectations. The children of Willow Creek were eager to learn, their parents supportive of her methods, and the school board had already extended her contract for the following year. Her cottage on Cottonwood Lane had become a true home, furnished simply but comfortably with items purchased from her teacher's salary, and a few precious objects saved from her Boston life, her mother's silver hairbrush, her father's leather-bound Shakespeare collection that Mrs. Peterson had helped her acquire from a second-hand dealer in Tucson. But the greatest joy of her new life was due to arrive any moment. Sunday afternoons belonged to Jackson now by the tacit agreement of the entire town. What had begun as formal visits after church had evolved into longer outings, picnics by the creek in autumn sunshine, rides to show her the beauty of the surrounding countryside, quiet evenings on her porch swing talking of books and dreams and slowly, carefully, the pasts that had shaped them both. Jackson had spoken of his family's Virginia plantation, of brothers lost at Gettysburg and Antietam, of his own wounds both physical and spiritual. Felicity had shared her sheltered Boston upbringing, her parents' expectations, her growing realization that she wanted more from life than society could offer. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. Jackson was riding up the lane, right on time as always. Her heart quickened at the sight of him, still handsome in his Sunday best, despite the light dusting of snow on his shoulders. She met him at the door. Accepting the small bouquet of late wildflowers, he offered a ritual that had begun with his first visit and continued regardless of what was in bloom. Today's offering was mostly dried grasses and a few hardy asters, but she treasured it as she did all his gestures. "First snow," he said by way of greeting, stamping his boots on the porch. "Winter's coming early this year." "Then we should make the most of this afternoon," she replied, ushering him inside where a fire crackled in the hearth. "I've made apple cider." They settled in her small sitting room, the domesticity of the scene both ordinary and miraculous. How far they had come from that dusty trading post where she had tried to trade her shoes for shelter. "I've been thinking," Jackson said after they had exchanged news of their week, her stories of schoolroom triumphs, his update on the new barn raising, "about what you said when we first met." "What did I say?" she asked, curious about this unexpected turn in conversation. "You said you could cook." "Remember," his eyes held a teasing light, "at Madison's trading post, I offered you passage in my wagon if you could cook better than me." Felicity laughed at the memory. "I believe I proved that claim on our journey." "You did indeed." He set his cider mug down carefully, suddenly serious. "I've been wondering if you might consider a more permanent position. As cook and other duties." Her breath caught as she realized what he was saying. "What other duties did you have in mind, Mr. Mills?" He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Wife duties, Miss O'Brien, if you do me the honor." Joy bubbled up inside her, unexpected yet somehow inevitable. "Are you asking me to marry you, Jackson?" "I am." His voice was steady, but she could see the vulnerability in his eyes. "I know it's not what you imagined for yourself." "Ranch life is hard, and I'm not a cultured man." "Yes," she interrupted, squeezing his hand. "Yes, I will marry you." The surprise on his face gave way to such profound happiness that Felicity felt tears spring to her eyes. This was what she had been seeking without knowing it, not just love, but partnership, a shared purpose. "I don't have a ring yet," he admitted, drawing her closer, "but I promise you this: you'll never have to trade your shoes for shelter again. Whatever we have, we'll build together." "I like the sound of that," she whispered as he bent to kiss her. Outside, the snow fell more heavily, blanketing Willow Creek in white. Inside, Felicity O'Brien and Jackson Mills planned their future, a future neither could have imagined when a desperate woman had stumbled into a trading post with nothing but her determination and a pair of Boston shoes. 2 years later, on a spring morning bright with promise, Felicity stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching Jackson teaching their infant daughter to ride by sitting her on his knee while he mimicked a horse's bouncing gait. Little Emma's delighted giggles carried across the yard, warming Felicity's heart even more than the Arizona sunshine. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. Jackson's cattle operation had expanded, while Felicity had established a small but successful side business breeding and training horses, drawing on skills she discovered during their courtship. She still taught at the Willow Creek School 3 days a week, having trained an assistant to handle the other days. The arrangement allowed her to pursue both her passions, education, and family life. "Mama," Emma called, waving a chubby hand. "Horse ride." Jackson looked up, catching Felicity's eye with a smile that still made her pulse quicken after all this time. In that moment, with the life they'd built together spread before her, Felicity remembered his words on the day he proposed. "Whatever we have, we'll build together." They had kept that promise to each other, through drought and plenty, through the challenges of marrying their different worlds, through the birth of their daughter and the hopes for more children to come. They had built something stronger than either could have created alone. As she stepped off the porch to join her family, Felicity thought of the shoes she had once been willing to trade for mere shelter. They were preserved in a trunk now, a reminder of the journey that had brought her here, not just the physical journey across the Arizona territory, but the journey from the woman she had been to the woman she had become. Jackson reached out his free hand as she approached, drawing her into their circle of joy. "What are you thinking about with that smile?" he asked, shifting Emma to his other knee. Felicity leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible in her Boston life. "I'm thinking about walking beside you," she said simply, "and how it was the best decision I ever made."